The power went out. The cold didn't. Toma had 40 pounds of fresh meat on his hands and maybe 3 days before it turned to rot. No fridge, no ice, no second chances. But this wasn't the first time in history a man stood in that spot. Long before electricity, medieval families kept meat for 8 months through snowstorms and silence. Not with luck, with knowledge, salt, smoke, and the earth beneath their feet. In this video, we follow Toma as he tries to remember what the world forgot and rebuilds the system that once fed villages through winter. The twist: some of these ancient tricks still work better than what we use today. Toma lived alone, tucked high in the Pyrenees. A quiet man, a quiet life. His roof leaked, his hands cracked, but the land gave just enough. He didn't plan to butcher that ram so soon, but the snows came early and the animal was limping. With no power, no freezer, and a storm rolling in, he had a choice: figure it out fast, or lose it all. He remembered his grandfather's voice telling stories beside the fire about how they used to keep meat through the winter. No instructions, no books, just memory instinct and desperation. And so, with 40 pounds of fresh meat and no time to waste, Toma stepped out into the cold to try and rebuild what history left behind. The first snowfall hit harder than expected. Toma stood by the wooden shed staring at 4 slabs of fresh meat, too fresh, too vulnerable. No fridge, no wind, and the sun was no help. The clock was ticking. He remembered an old tale how soldiers during the siege of Carcassonne survived with nothing but salt barrels and butchered pigs. Salt pulls out the water, he whispered, unsure if he even believed it. So he tried. He built a makeshift box from pine planks, laid the meat flat, and began packing salt like he was burying treasure. Every cut had to be surrounded top, bottom, sides. No air, no gap, just salt. But he was too impatient. 3 days in, he cut one open. The center was pink. Worse, it smelled off. His hands shook. Another wasted piece. He nearly gave up right there. But the next morning, while feeding the fire, he noticed how the dry salt crust had hardened like a shell. That gave him an idea. He rewrote the steps. Slower, deeper. He repacked every cut this time, layering salt over the meat, letting it sit longer before burying it again. After 10 days, the slabs were dry to the touch. Tough, preserved. It wasn't magic, it was chemistry. Salt draws moisture out of the meat, making it too dry for bacteria to thrive. Civilizations from Rome to Ming China relied on this method for centuries. No power, just patience. What's wild, modern survivalists still use it. Off-gridders swear by salt barrels when deep freezers fail. Even gourmet chefs use dry-cured techniques today without realizing they're echoing peasant wisdom. Toma didn't just save meat. He saved time. He saved winter. Every salted cut was a promise that his daughter wouldn't go hungry come February. Sometimes the oldest solutions aren't desperate, they're just proven. The salted meat was safe, but dull, chewy, pale, like chewing on a belt. Toma sat by the fire one night, remembering how his grandfather used to hang sausages over the hearth, letting smoke dance around them for days. Not cooking, just curing, making them richer, darker, safer. He didn't have a smokehouse, just a shed with cracked walls and a fire pit built into a mound of clay. But that was enough. He carved hooks from hazelwood-strung meat with twine and sealed every gap in the shed with mud and moss. Smoke had to stay in, but the heat couldn't get too high. That was the trick. His first try, a disaster. The fire burned too hot. The meat sweat, then spoiled. All that work gone to rot. He nearly scrapped the idea altogether, but then he remembered something an old farmer once said: "Smoke don't rush. You rush, you ruin." So this time he slowed down. He started the fire with alder and willow, both known for cool burning smoke. He placed green moss over the flames to keep them low, then left it. For hours. For days. By the 4th day, the meat had turned mahogany. It smelled like earth and wood and survival. When he sliced into it, the meat held firm, rich with color and taste. It was still raw technically, but cured, preserved, safe. Cold smoking doesn't cook. It surrounds. It coats meat in phenols and acids that bacteria can't stand. It dries without boiling. And it creates flavor like nothing else. This wasn't guesswork. It was science. Modern charcuterie masters use the same principles. So do backpackers with smoke tubes. Even NASA studied cold smoking for long-term rations. But peasants, they figured it out with bark and the instinct. Toma looked at the hanging meat, now deep brown and fragrant, and smiled. For once, the shed didn't feel like desperation. It felt like tradition. By late autumn, Toma's small storage rack was overflowing. Salted, smoked, dried, yes. But not everything could be processed fast enough. And now, a cold snap was coming, followed by a freeze. He needed to back up something simple, fast, and safe. He remembered a trick an old monk once taught him. If the wind can't touch it, and the sun can't see it, it'll last longer than you expect. So he grabbed a spade. Behind the hut, he dug a pit shoulder-deep narrow, like a well turned sideways. The soil was already chilled. At that depth, it stayed cold year-round, especially if you kept the opening small. He lined the bottom with dried leaves, added smooth, flat stones for drainage, then packed straw along the walls to keep moisture out. A wooden lid went on top, followed by packed earth. His first test was cautious half a ham wrapped in cloth, lowered in like treasure. He checked it after a week. No mold, no odor. Still firm. By winter, he'd turned the pit into a full underground fridge. Clay pots filled with lard sealed meat, wrapped bundles of herbs, even leftover broth stored in jars. And it worked. Even when a January storm snapped branches and froze the stream solid, the pit stayed just cold, not frozen, not spoiled. Toma knew modern folks would call this a root cellar or maybe earth fridge, but this wasn't some off-grid novelty. This was necessity turned into know-how. A trick that worked when everything else failed. And funny thing, scientists today talk about geothermal insulation and thermal mass, big words for something medieval peasants had nailed with nothing but dirt and instinct. No wires, no fuel, just gravity, darkness, and timing. When Toma opened the lid and pulled up a jug of stew in February, still cold and safe, he didn't smile out of pride. He smiled out of relief. Because survival isn't flashy, it's quiet, buried, and waiting to be remembered. Toma had heard the story a dozen times. A farmer had buried a leg of pork under a pile of cold ashes. Months later, still good. No spoilage, no rot. Just clean meat, like time had forgotten it. At first, he didn't buy it. Ash. From the fire. It sounded more like superstition than science. But one morning, with a few leftover cuts and no more jar salt or space in the pit, Toma gave it a shot. He scooped a basket of soft gray ash from his old hearth. The stuff was dry, sterile, and fine as flour. He laid a bed of ash in a clay pot, set the meat inside, and gently poured more ash over it until it vanished completely. Then he sealed the pot with cloth and placed it in the corner of his hut where the sun didn't reach. Weeks passed. He tried to forget it. Then hunger hit harder than expected. Toma hesitated when he opened the pot, but when he brushed away the ash, the meat looked untouched. No smell, no slime. Just firm, dry surface like it had been resting in a cocoon. He cooked it right away. No stomachache, no regrets. From then on, he kept a corner of his hut for ash storage. The fire gave more than heat, it gave a preservative. Ash blocked moisture, killed bacteria, and starved anything that wanted to rot the meat. He didn't know the chemistry behind it, but modern science does. Cold ash is alkaline, absorbs humidity, and suffocates microbes. It's a natural desiccant and antimicrobial barrier, like vacuum sealing without the machine. For Toma, it was just practical. For us, it's genius we forgot. We spend fortunes on freeze-drying gear, oxygen absorbers, and sterile bags, yet overlook the simplest trick use, what the fire leaves behind. Sometimes survival isn't about invention. It's about trust in old stories, old fires, and the wisdom buried in gray dust. Toma didn't think much of bees except when one stung his hand. But he did remember one thing his grandmother used to say, "Nothing spoils in honey, not even time." That stuck with him. One afternoon while checking on the village chapel, he found a sealed jar buried beneath loose stones in the apothecary's wall. Inside was something strange, fruit slices, still soft, still fragrant, floating in thick golden syrup. He tasted one. Sweet, tart, perfect. It couldn't have been younger than a year. Back home, Toma looked at his leftover lamb ribs' small cuts he didn't have room to salt or smoke. They wouldn't last the week. He glanced at the jar of raw honey on his shelf and thought, why not? He heated it slightly, just enough to make it pour smooth, and carefully lowered the ribs in. Sealed the jar. Waited. 3 weeks later, the ribs came out firm, glistening, and sweet-smelling. Almost too sweet, but not rotten. Not even close. The honey had created an airtight seal. No mold, no bacteria, no rot. Just slow, silent preservation. No electricity, no chemicals. Just nature's candy doing what it's done for millennia. He learned that ancient Egyptians had used the same trick, preserving dates nuts, even duck meat in honey jars, sealed inside tombs. And archaeologists, they found them still edible thousands of years later. Turns out honey's not just sweet, it's antibacterial, low moisture, and acidic. Bacteria can't survive in it. It's like nature's formaldehyde, but edible. Toma started using honey sparingly, not just for flavor, but as a storage tool, a treasure jar, a preservative he could eat. Nowadays, we panic when the fridge goes out or the power cuts off. We reach for plastic, for chemicals, for freezers. But sometimes all you need is a spoonful of gold. Toma was down to his last slab of smoked venison. The rest had either been eaten spoiled or worse stolen by wild dogs. He had no salt left, no more honey. And the smokehouse burnt from a chimney spark last month. He stood over the cold soil meat in one hand and stared at his last clay jar, the kind used for storing grains. Then he remembered a tale from an old soldier, how they used to bury sealed jars of meat in deep earth to hide it from raiders and keep it cool. It sounded desperate, but Toma didn't have many cards left to play. So he wrapped the meat in linen soaked with wine and herbs, stuffed it into the jar, and sealed it with beeswax. Then he dug. 2 feet down, the soil was still warm. No good. He kept digging until the air turned damp, and the clay under his feet clung to the spade. He buried the jar, packed the earth tight, and left it marked only by a crooked stick. Weeks passed. The snow came, then thawed. One evening, after a long hunt, Toma unearthed the jar. He expected rot, mold, mush. Instead, meat that was soft, aromatic, and shockingly fresh. The linen had dried slightly but kept the flavor sealed. The wine had added a subtle tang. And the earth, it had done its job better than any icebox. Toma laughed, half in disbelief, half in relief. In today's world, we build cold storage with compressors, wiring, and thermostats. But peasants like Toma, they used what was beneath their feet, literally. And science backs it up. Deep soil maintains stable temperature year-round. Combined with breathable clay and sealed herbs, it creates a microclimate as stable as a fridge drawer. That night, Toma made stew, not just with meat, but with confidence. He didn't need a machine to preserve food. He needed clay intuition and a shovel. Toma learned the hard way that nothing lasts forever, especially not meat. He once dried rabbit strips and wrapped them in cloth, only to find them crawling with beetle larvae 2 weeks later. Not a great surprise in a hut that barely kept out the rain. So, when an old trader passed through the mountain pass and offered him a strange method, dip it in wax like sealing a letter, Toma just raised an eyebrow. "Beeswax?" he asked. The man nodded. "Bees know how to preserve things. Follow their lead." That evening, Toma melted wax over a small flame, careful not to scorch it. He dunked a strip of dried lamb into the pot and watched it come out golden glossy and sealed like armor. The smell still rich, the texture still dry, but no longer exposed. He hung the waxed meat near the ceiling where smoke would deter pests. A week later, no bugs, no mold, no sourness. The meat tasted exactly the same as the day he sealed it. It was simple, elegant, and oddly modern. Because that's the kicker, modern chefs now use wax coating to preserve cheeses, confit meats, even aged sausages. Not for show, for protection. It blocks out air bacteria and insects in one swoop. And unlike plastic wrap or vacuum sealers, beeswax is natural, reusable, and breathable. The very thing high-end food brands now market as artisanal. Go figure. Toma didn't care about branding. He cared about survival. And on stormy nights when meat was scarce and mold was always one rain away, wax sealing felt like magic wrapped in logic. No chemicals, no fridges, just a golden shell between hunger and hope. Toma didn't plan to become a preservation expert. He was just a man trying to save what little food he had before the frost came, before mold came, before hunger did. But through salt smoke, cold earth, ash, honey wax, and ice, he didn't just preserve meat. He preserved a piece of human wisdom that most of us forgot the moment the fridge was invented. And now, centuries later, that wisdom still works. In off-grid cabins, in homestead kitchens, in your backyard if you're willing to try. Because preserving food isn't just about calories. It's about control. About learning to stretch time, not just survive it. So if even one of these ancient methods spoke to you, don't let it stay ancient. Try it. Practice it, share it, pass it on. And if this journey with Toma gave you something, an idea, a challenge, a question, drop it in the comments below. We read everyone. And subscribe if you haven't already, because this channel is all about reviving old knowledge for a world that's learning to live simply again. See you in the next one.